Okay, so we're going to do a frame by frame animation, which is where there is a keyframe. You can see here in the timeline that there is a keyframe in every single frame. So in each frame, something is happening down the timeline. So we're making a change on every single frame. And we're going to do a simple text, and then we're also going to do a library animation in the second half. So creating animations that are stored in the library that you can repeat over and over again. And those will also be frame by frame library animations. So we're going to make a new file, new. And for this one, we will use ActionScript 3.0. You don't want to use WebGL. You might have noticed in the last project when we used WebGL that the text tool and some other tools were grayed out and weren't options. And in the ActionScript, we have access to all of the tools. ActionScript is a programming language, but this isn't a programming class, so you don't need to know that, but just so you have a little bit on the background of what that is. So we're gonna press OK. And just like we did before, we want to come into the properties here and change the size. So to make it HD, we want 1920 tab 1080. And you can just press enter, and then we leave it the frames per second at 24. You can come up here and put fit in window to get it fitting in the entire window. So we're going to start with a word. You can really type your name or any word that you want. Just keep it professional. Remember, we're in a school setting. So you come to the text tool here, and you can just click anywhere and start typing. So my type was set with what I was using before, which yours probably isn't. So you can click in here and press Control A to select the type. You can come pick the font that you want. I think a sans serif font. So serifs are these little like feet and tails that stick out. I think for this project, a font without serif, which is called sans serif, is better. And Arial Black is a really bold font that will work well for what we're doing. That's my suggestion. You can pick whatever font you want. You can also change the color here, but we're going to actually add a stroke onto it. So make it big. Mine is 400. You can click in here to type the size you want. You could type as big as 500. It really depends on what your word is. I'm going to bring mine back to 400. So depending on how long your word is, just make it fill up the screen in a nice way. Then you can come back to your selection and you can move it around and get it exactly where you want. Okay, so get your word set up to the size you want it to be. And we're gonna break it apart and make it into individual shapes so they'll no longer be editable letters, and this will help us be able to change the colors and animate it, but you won't be able to go back in and change the text. So make sure you get it set up the way you want. So I'm just clicked on it with the selection tool. I'm right clicking and I'm going to break apart, which is Control B. And we can see that breaks it apart into individual objects. And then I want to break it apart again. And now we can see these are individual objects here. And make sure to save, Control S. So I'm going to call this tutorial. So make sure you're saving a lot. So get your letters broken apart. I'm going to get this back by doing Control Z. Okay, so now we're going to add a stroke. And I'm going to click on this, and I have a stroke color selected, but nothing's happening. What I need to do is use this tool here, the ink bottle tool. It's right below the paint bucket. It looks sort of like a paint bucket. So I'm going to select that tool. I'm going to select on the stroke that I want, which I'll just do black. And then you click on this letter. You have to click on the inside and the outside. So this hole in the D is called a counterform. So if you have any counterforms like A's, O's, you have to click on the outside and the inside. The rest of these letters don't have counterforms, so they should be fine. So I'm just clicking on the edge of the letter, and with the paint bucket and this ink bottle tool, where it's clicking is where that arrow is It's a little confusing because you might think it's where the paint is dipping out of the bucket, but it's actually this arrow here. So I'm taking the arrow and clicking on the edge. And now we can select them all by just doing Control A, and you can increase the stroke. I'll make mine 6, see how that looks. You can make it bigger or smaller if you want. And I'm gonna do no fill on mine because we're gonna fill them with all different colors. So right now I'm just gonna do the no fill for that. And then you can play around here in the properties. You can play around with the stroke size. You can also change the cap and the join. Maybe you wanna make it more square or mitered, and see how that changes it a little bit. I'm gonna go back to round, kind of like the way that looked. But this is totally up to you. That's just a design choice. So now we can click out of it and you can see what it looks like, and you can make changes based on your style. Okay, so we're gonna talk a lot about keyframes because we're gonna be making a lot of keyframes today. So I'm gonna come to 1 second, which is 24 frames right here, because 24 frames per second. I'm just clicking and highlighting that frame, and I'm pressing F6 on the keyboard. And this gives us some space to work with. This is how long the word design or whatever is on this layer is going to last in the timeline. So that's like building our space for this layer to exist. Where there is a dot, that means there's a keyframe, and this little square, this little rectangle here, means that the whole thing is unchanged, that this whole line, nothing happens and nothing changes in the animation. So even though there's 2 keyframes for the beginning and the end, this square for this section, this rectangle for this section, means nothing in this section has been changed. It's just staying the same, which is good when you're looking at it quickly visually to know, like, this is the part where nothing happens for that layer. So just so you know what that means, no change is made when this rectangle exists. So if you want to make a bunch of keyframes, you can just press, I'm coming back to the second one, you could just keep pressing F6. I'm just pressing F6 and it's creating the next keyframe. And this is what we're gonna do with ours. And then you could see when I pressed F6, something happened. And even though I haven't actually made a change since I pressed F6, it added a keyframe there. So if you need to delete a keyframe, it's called clear keyframe. So you just click on the keyframe you want to delete, you right click and come to clear keyframe. And then you can see that in that frame, the keyframe, the dot, is gone and just the rectangle is left. You can also remove frames. So I can right click and remove frames, and that frame is gone. And you can click on one, hold shift, and click on as many as you want, highlight a whole bunch of them, and right click, remove frames. And then they're all gone. And the one thing to be careful about that is that if you had any changes in those frames, in those parts of the layers, they're now deleted, so it deletes everything. So just be careful when removing frames. I'm gonna start filling each of these letters in with color and adding a keyframe each time to make them animate as if they're changing color. So I'm gonna come to the second frame. I'm gonna leave the first one as is. You can even leave 2 or 3 to start it a little slower. And I'm going to press F6, and then I'm going to choose a color with the paint bucket. So we were in the ink bottle tool before, now we're in the paint bucket tool, which is going to fill it in. So I'm gonna pick any color, and then I'm just clicking to fill, I'm pressing F6. I'm gonna see how everything is selected. I'm just gonna come out of here and deselect. You can also come to edit, deselect all. So I'm gonna come back into the paint bucket. You don't want everything selected. I'm gonna pick another color, fill it. Oh, that's an ugly color. Fill it, press F6. Now I'm picking another color, fill it, press F6. Picking another color, fill it, press F6. Picking another color, fill it, press F6. So I'm picking a color, making a change, filling it, and pressing F6. And now we can scrub and see it changing. So we can continue with this. You can make it change. We're not even at 1 second here, and we're going to end up making 10 seconds total of animation. So for this part with the lettering and the hand drawing that we're going to do next, you probably want that to be at least half, up to 5 seconds. So you can do like an ombre effect, some coloring, F6. Picking a next color, filling, F6. Picking the next color, filling, F6. Picking a color, what do I want to do? F6. 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 So this is a good time to like listen to some music. Maybe a podcast can help you, because it does take a while to do it, but you just have one hand on the mouse, one hand on the keyboard, and every time you make a change, you press F6 to make a keyframe. So it records the change and it animates it. Okay, so now we're going to use the paintbrush to draw little designs and animate those designs being drawn. So you can continue, each keyframe we make, you can continue having your letters change color or not, that's up to you. So I'm coming into the paintbrush tool here. I'm using a drawing tablet just because I think it helps with this, but you do not have to use that. So the paintbrush draws with fills, which I know is a little weird. So if you want, I'm just going to turn the stroke color off so you can have that in your head that it's drawing with fills. And I'm going to pick, you can pick any color for the paintbrush. And there's a couple options down here on the toolbar for the paintbrush, and then there's options over here in the properties. So I'm going to press F6 one more time to let the colors, since they'll have been changing, to let them stop. So you can draw anything. You can press V and then you can select the whole thing and move it around. One thing to be careful of, I'm going to do Control Z to get rid of that, is when you're in the paintbrush tool, there's this object drawing. So let me just show you what happens. I think it's easier if I show you. So then if I come to V, you can see how these are kind of separate shapes, which is good for some things, but not for what we're doing right now. So what you want to do is make sure when you're in the paintbrush that this is not turned on. By default, it's not on, so it shouldn't be a problem, but just in case any of you start having issues. So this is with object drawing off, and now we can see it's one shape, which is what we want for this. So if some weird stuff starts happening, that might be why. Nothing else on there needs to be turned on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw like these little circles. You can make yours a lot more interesting, but I'm just going to animate it actually being drawn. So I'm going to draw them in segments. And there's some options here, obviously the size of the brush you can change. You can change it here. You can also use the right bracket key to make it bigger and the left bracket key to make it smaller. So that's a quick way to do it. And then you can change the smoothing. So the smoothing, let's put it on. If you have a mouse, you might need to do this a little more. So that's about 20. And you can crank it all the way up. And that's going to smooth out your line a lot. The one thing about having the smoothing too high is we're going to make little pieces, and the little pieces are going to look kind of funny when the smoothing is on too high. So I was practicing, and I think about 60 with the pen tool is a good way to go. I'm just gonna delete this stuff. Okay, so the process here is I'm going to draw a piece, press F6, then continue drawing another piece, press F6, continue drawing another piece, press F6. So we can come up into the timeline and see that it looks like my little circle is being drawn. So then just continue with this. So make sure you're pressing F6 and not F5. I just pressed F5 a bunch of times and had to delete them all. So F5 does something different. So you have one hand on F6 and then the other hand drawing. So drawing a little piece, press F6, drawing another little piece, press F6. And varying the size is nice. You do not have to make circles. You can make whatever kind of design you want. So then sometimes I do maybe just a little dot and press F6, and then maybe F6, draw F6, draw F6, close it, F6, 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 F6. So you can go on and on, draw a little piece, F6. So I want you to have some that have these pieces being drawn. You can also do like zigzags or sun rays, so you could do like F6, 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 or you could do something like just a line being drawn, F6, F6, F6. I think that's actually harder to make it look good. Doing something like the zigzag is a little more forgiving. Or you could just do quick little lines like F6, 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 F6. So let's see how that looks. It's always good to test before you go too far. So we can start from the beginning and press play. And see how it would look cool if the letters kept changing color that whole time. So that's just up to you. You could also do them on two different layers. You could do the designs on a separate layer so that you could make all of those keyframes one at a time, so you wouldn't have to be thinking about changing the color of the letter while you're drawing the details. So that's an option too that might save you some time. So then once you get all of the details of your drawings done, I want you to color them in too. So come into the paint bucket, and one thing that we didn't talk about in the paint bucket was this option here on the bottom, which is gap size. So this doesn't work for huge gaps, but it works for small gaps. So it's good for when you've done something hand drawn to do close, large, or medium gaps, because sometimes you'll see the paint bucket isn't filling and it looks like your object, your drawing is a closed shape, but it might not be. So I have large gaps chosen. I'm going to choose a color and I'm just going to click, and remember that with the paint bucket, it's the arrow that you want to place where you want it to fill, not the little paint that's spilling out of the bucket. So I'm clicking in here, pressing F6, making a different color, clicking in here, pressing F6, clicking in here, pressing F6, and so on and so on. Pressing F6. You can also change the stroke here. So if you click on that and press F6, whoops, you can click on the little dots and press F6. You can obviously have your background a different color, and then you can come here and click on these and press F6. Click on these and press F6, and you can make them any color you want. And you can make them change colors multiple times, so that's a good way to fill up a lot of time. So I want you to draw some fun designs, anything you want. Press F6. So I'm going to press F6 again so that stays, those colors that we have stay for a second, and then I'm going to come and delete this stuff because I want to show you another option for drawing. So I'm just selecting all around them and pressing delete, get rid of this. So I'm pressing F6 one more time just to give it another keyframe because I've deleted everything and I just want to give it a keyframe or two. You can even press F6 again and give it 2 to let it stop for 1 or 2 frames or more if you like. So I'm going to draw a rectangle around this, and we're going to then erase it and reverse the frame so it looks like the rectangle is being drawn. It's hard to sort of build stuff backwards when you're doing this. It's easier to build it forwards and then reverse the frame. You'll see as we go. So I'm in the paintbrush. Paintbrushes, again, are just with fills, so I'm changing the fill color I'll just leave it this blue so you can see what's happening. If I'm pressing shift and painting, it makes a straight line. I'm releasing the mouse and then releasing shift. And then I'm gonna press shift again and paint another straight line. So you can spend more time doing this. So I released the mouse first and then shift. So now I'm pressing shift, clicking and drawing a straight line, releasing the mouse, releasing shift. If you wait to release shift, it can make a little tail kind of thing at the end. So now I'm pressing shift, clicking and drawing a straight line. You can obviously spend more time making yours look good. So I have the rectangle around it, and now I want to make it look like it's erasing. So, or it's being drawn, but I'm going to do it backwards. So you can kind of think of in your brain where you want it to start and end. Doesn't really matter. So I'm just coming with the eraser. Okay, so you can make the brush bigger by pressing the right bracket and smaller by pressing the left bracket. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase a little bit and press F6, and then erase a little bit more and press F6, and then keep on erasing, press F6, erasing, press F6, continue doing that at whatever speed you want. You can do it fast or slow, do a big section or a small section. I'm gonna make my brush a little bigger with the right bracket. Then I'm erasing F6, erasing F6, erasing a little bit F6, erasing F6, erasing F6, erasing F6. So erasing is a good way to get some animation stuff done, and you can obviously spend longer on yours, but it's a good way to kind of do stuff backwards. So you can see, again, this stuff can take some time, but really just take your time and think about your design, how you want it to look, how it's going to be set up. It's kind of a good mental exercise, like putting a puzzle together if you're thinking about stuff, how it's going to work backwards and forwards. Okay, almost done. So erasing F6, erasing F6. Okay, let's go back. Should have remembered what keyframe I started on. Here we're at 61, 62, is that 63? So we can just watch what that looks like. Right, so it looks like that. And now we want to reverse it. So let's come back to where it starts. I'm going to take the first one, hold shift, click on the last one so they're all highlighted, right click, and reverse frames. So now you can scrub it and it's going the opposite way. So you can think about how you want yours to work, how you want yours to build. It looks like I forgot to press F6 in the beginning, so you can just go back and fix that. You'll get used to the process. So when you're done with the animation, you want to make sure to hold it for at least half a second, maybe even a whole second, because you don't want it just to end and stop. So I'm going to come out here to a second after. We're at 5 seconds here, and I'm just going to press F6, and you can see it's holding the animation there. I could have kept the rectangle around it so the rectangle could stay, but hold it in an interesting spot here. Okay, so now we're going to work on a different technique called library animation. So I'm going to call this layer, just double click on it and call it design. And I'm going to lock it, so I don't mess with it anymore. So I just did that by clicking here on the lock. And then I'm making a new layer here, and I'm going to call it library. And I want to fill this space, right? So you can see it's automatically created that rectangle here. So I can click on here and press F5, and it's created that space for me. And now, if you didn't see that rectangle, you would just click there and press F5, but it automatically created that amount. Now I'm going to press F6 again, just to give myself a blank keyframe to start on. So you can have your lettering continue throughout this, or you can make a totally new design. I'm just starting on a blank canvas, so you can see more clearly what I'm doing. So you can also change the color of your stage. Just be aware, if you do change the stage color, it is going to change it on this part too. So just make sure that all looks good together. So if you change the stage, it changes on the whole thing. Just remember that. Okay, so we're over here. We have the layer we don't want to mess with locked, and we're going to draw an animation. We're going to do a timeline within a timeline. So we're going to make a symbol. So we just come up to Insert, New Symbol. This pops up. I'm going to call it tree because I'm going to make a tree and we want it to be a graphic. And you can make yours whatever you want. So I'm going to press OK. And now you can see I have a new timeline up here. My 2 layers are gone and I'm in a different timeline. And we can see in the scene here, we have these different options. So we can go back to the scene just by clicking on this. And then we have our 2 layers here that we had built, the whole timeline that we had built. And then to get back into the tree that I was building, we can just come into the library. If you don't see it, you can go into your window, make sure that library is checked, and you can double click on here. And now we're back. You can see this is this new timeline. So it's like a timeline. This object is going to contain its own timeline, which is really cool. And we see there's a crosshairs here, and that's really important because that's where, when we're going to place this animation into our stage, this is into our scene, this is where it's gonna help us decide where it will go. Okay, so we can make a frame by frame animation in here just like we've been doing. And I'm gonna draw like a tree growing, and so I'm gonna get my brush, and I'm gonna have mine coming out of the crosshairs. The crosshairs will be like the base of mine, but you could draw yours where the crosshairs is in the middle. You can really do whatever you want, obviously, but this is just how I'm gonna work with mine. So I'm gonna pick like a brown color for my tree. So I'm going to just start drawing the base of my tree and then press F6. So I want to make it look like my tree is like growing. Press F6. So every time I have it growing a little more, I'm just going to press F6. And then I can maybe make some branches and make them start growing. And you can have like 2 parts growing at the same time. So I'm going to make this branch grow a little more and this branch grow a little more, and then press F6. And maybe the middle needs another branch coming out. And then you can make your brush smaller to make more detailed elements. So I could start drawing like one there, and press F6. And then I can so I'm just drawing a couple lines, pressing F6. You can make yours as slow or as fast as you want. I'm gonna keep making my brush smaller to add more details. So maybe these little guys all start showing up on one frame. So just think about how you want yours designed. Be intentional with it, and press F6 every time you want it to be moving. So I'm talking and doing this at the same time, so it might not look the greatest. And then I'm going to start adding some leaves on it. So maybe I'll start with red. That's not, I want it to be like a fall tree is what I'm going for here. Let's see, maybe a darker red. So I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, and then I'm just going to do like some spots of red coming on. Press F6, some more red, F6, 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 and then maybe I'll throw some orange in there. That's not a good color. You can always do Control Z if you don't like the way it looks. F6, 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 and then maybe there'll be some yellow. And this is a better color. Okay, I can't spend too much time on this because this is a tutorial, but you guys, I think, are starting to get the idea, so I'm just adding more elements to it, pressing F6. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to go back in my timeline. You can obviously scrub it. You can also play it like we've been doing. And you can have it start from nothing too. I have mine starting as a little stump. Okay, so the tree is growing and we can save. Make sure to save after you do stuff like that. So then we can bring it into our scene. So I can come back into the scene here by clicking right here. And then I can either take the tree from this image, or I can grab it from the name here and drag it into my scene. Now nothing's happening on the timeline because I haven't given it enough space to live. So I can come back and double click in here and I can see it's 36 frames, which is like 1.5 seconds. It might make your life easier if you make yours like an even amount of frames, but we just have to give it enough space. So there's 1 second is 6, 1.5. I can do it out to 7 just to be safe. So I'm coming into this layer. I'm coming to give it enough space to exist. And then I'm just pressing F5, not F6, to just give it that space. So let's see, now we have that. And it will start looping again. So if I come out here to, let's go to 9, I'm gonna press F5. It'll just loop and loop and loop. So that might be what you want because it can look really cool, but you might not want it to loop. So if you don't want it to loop, we can come back and double click on the tree in the library, get back into this timeline, and we just have to make more frames here, more blank frames here. So all you have to do is come out here, and maybe I'll come all the way to 5 seconds and press F5. So that will just stop it there. So it should automatically update. Let me do a Control S and let it save. So it should automatically update on here. Let's see what happens. Yep, so now it just stops and plays that long. So just be aware of the frames you've created. You know, if you want it to go really long and have it stop, you're just gonna have to add, you just have to come all the way to the end and give it plenty of time. Like if you wanted to last the whole animation, which your entire animation will be 10 seconds, you could just be safe and even give it till 11 seconds. So just go over a little bit of the time you know you're gonna need it for. So I'm coming back in here, and then now once I have them in my stage, right, you can add as many as you want, and once they're in here I can come into my selection tool and you can click on it with the free transform and you can change the size. And with organic elements like trees, flowers, and stuff, it's okay if the aspect ratio gets a little warped. I don't want to see that kind of thing, but you know, some can be a little bit shorter, wider, some can be taller and thinner. You can also flip it around just by doing that, because that might change it up a little bit. So you have a lot of options there. You can just change them and resize them. You can drag as many copies as you want. And then you also might want to have one stop and another start at a different time. So to do that, you just need to make a new layer. So let's say I want this little, say I want a really big one to start at it, like I want these two to start at the same time, but then I want this one to start at a different time. So I'm gonna make a new layer right here, and I'm just gonna take this, I'm gonna Control C to copy it, and then Control X to cut it, and then I'm going to come into where I want it to start, on this new layer. So I've made a new layer. So these start here. So maybe I want the new one to start while it's still moving, but towards the end of that animation. So I'm clicking where I want it to start. I'm pressing F6. And then I'm doing Control V to paste. That came over here, so I'm going to move it here. And then that looks pretty good. It's the same size I had it. So you can kind of set it up in the first layer to get it the right size and then paste it in. And yep, that looks like it lasts the same amount. So let's see how that looks. So you could have multiple layers with them starting at different times. You could make it loop or not loop. That's totally up to you and your design choice. So you can combine elements from the first and second part of the lecture to make it more interesting. Sometimes when you're working with these these are the library animations, which are the timelines within the timelines, like sometimes stuff can get messed up and you want to go back and fix it, and you think you can go back and figure it out what you did, but sometimes it's better just to delete the layer or right click and delete layer because sometimes trying to troubleshoot and figuring that stuff out takes way longer than just doing it again and making a new layer. So that's my little tip. I think it can help if you just sometimes start over. You're always learning, and in these projects are all about learning, so don't worry if you have to delete a layer and start over. Try not to get frustrated. Just know it's part of that learning process. Because these are embedded animations, these library animations that we've brought, they're embedded animations. We can't adjust the timeline here on the stage. You can only adjust the timeline when you click into the library here. That's where you can adjust the keyframes and stuff. The only thing you can adjust about the animation here is how long it's lasting and when it's starting and stopping, depending on the layer. So since these are embedded animations into the scene, they can give you some trouble sometimes. And my advice for that is just to delete the layer, start over. You're never gonna lose what you have in the library. Like if you deleted all of these, you still have this library element. So you can still always drag it into your scene whenever you want. Okay, so you can combine what we've learned, the techniques we've learned, in any interesting way that you want. That creativity part is up to you. I just want to see that you have all of these techniques in your animation, but you can make them work together however you want. You know, you could have the library animations coming in the text here. It's totally up to you. Okay, so exporting. Now remember there's a couple steps here, so I'm going to go through it one more time. So first thing, we want to save, Control S, and then we're going to go to File, Export Video, and you want to make sure this Convert Video in Adobe Media Encoder is checked. That's super important. And mine is saved to where I want it to be saved, but make sure you're in the right folder and everywhere that you want it to be, and make sure the size is the same, 1920 by 1080, and then just press export. Okay. And now Adobe Media Encoder will open. Okay, so now in Adobe Media Encoder, let me just make this smaller so you remember that it's a separate program. We have the H.264, and if you click on either that, or you can click on Custom to get into this next window. So it's this next window we want to be in to get some of these settings. So we definitely want the format H.264. This is turning the MOV, the QuickTime file that Animate made, we're turning it into an MP4. In the output name is another place where you can decide where it's going, what folder it's going. Obviously make sure these two are checked. Well, we don't have audio, so that doesn't really matter. We're going to come into the video settings, and same thing, change this bit rate to 25. And it'll automatically change the other one when you set it. And so that's the important thing, that you're changing the bit rate to 25, that it's an H.264, that's an MP4. It's not going to work for YouTube. And then make sure you know where you saved it, where the output is going to, and then press OK. But remember, you're not done at this point. You still have to press the little green play button to play it, and then it's going to show in the bottom, and then it should be on my desktop. Yep, here it is. So just remember to press that play button, remember to make the MP4, remember to save it in a spot where you can remember it. And another important thing is that this frame by frame animation is going to be a much larger file. So just be aware of that. If your computer's being a little slow, you know, give it a rest. This is much larger than the file size than the tween animation. So if you notice that, just be aware of that and have fun.